Good morning, everyone. There's a lot of beautiful faces out there. That is a really big smile, Alice. Thank you all for coming all the way to Zalik. Many of you have probably never heard of this place, but we definitely are glad that you are here to witness the work of four amazing fellows that have worked together for 2 weeks under the theme of Monumental Affairs. So the first time I did my presentation, I was just going to talk about monumental affairs. And then one of my really good friends, Zeno Franchini, told me that you all would like to know a slight bit about me before I jump to monumental affairs. So we have a couple slides that'll just talk about the work, and again, blame him. So griot, West African term, essentially a storyteller. I like to use architecture and design to tell stories. I believe that there are anthropological moments that exist within space, and I enjoy highlighting those. I enjoy highlighting the ritual of space as opposed to the tectonics of space. So I'm going to show just a couple projects that relate to that theme, and then immediately jump into monumental affairs. So for those you do not know, this is Chicago, the city limits. This is my home. This is where I was born. This is where I'm from. The number 1 is the far west side, where I lived. The number 2 is where I attended high school on the north side. And number 3, where I also went to school in downtown Chicago. And the reason I like to show this slide is because transversing the city of Chicago and understanding what that means is what absolutely impacted my work. To understand what it meant to go from workforce housing to very elegant single-family homes to massive towers that oftentimes many people who look like me could never even believe to afford, absolutely shaped the way I view the built environment. And so as I would take the school bus for an hour and 20 minutes there and back from kindergarten through 8th grade, and then take the city bus to high school, an hour and 30 minutes every day there and back, the amount of time I spent understanding what the city means, what urban areas mean, what disinvestment means, what access to resources mean, absolutely changed my opinion on what it means to design for people. And then when you go to architecture school, you know, they show you the big buildings that everyone loves, the Hancock building. We actually had our high school luncheon on the top floor. And when you're going through these buildings, you always wonder, why don't they ever show black architects? Why can't I ever see the work of someone who looks like me? Or at least a facsimile, right? Give me just maybe even a little bit darker or lighter. I'll take anything, but I couldn't even get that as I was going through school. And so my approach really began to understand what it means to amplify marginalized voices. And so one project that kind of jump-started my career is all the way in Miami, Florida. The actual city is called Opa-locka. The real name is Opa-tisha-Wakalaka. It is a Seminole name for the Seminole Native Americans that were there. And part of the work was moving into this community, listening, sourcing, a consistent feedback loop. And then in the end, we found that they simply wanted community spaces to help their neighborhood. So we found this old roofing company, very nondescript. And then we went and did this full community day where we painted the streets in collaboration with Walter Hood. And then we did the entire painting on the wall in collaboration with Olaleka Jafos. And then we created this community space that people in the neighborhood can use. And one of the things that we made sure that was a guarantee was that if you live in the area of Opa-locka, you have a subsidized fee of renting this entire space. And if you lived outside of the city limits, you had to pay tenfold what those in the city limits meant. Because if you wanted to help these communities, we had to do it with as minimal displacement as possible. We had to make sure that the individuals that live there have the priority of space all the time. And so this was the inside of the building. Again, very nondescript industrial building that we turned into a full art gallery that we actually have had people as world-renowned as Hank Willis Thomas show work inside of this warehouse. And if you're familiar with the art scene, Hank Willis Thomas is one of the foremost African-American visual artists in the entire country. The other tough thing about Opa-locka is that it is a food desert. For those of you who may not be familiar with the term, it essentially means that within the city limits, there is no access to fresh produce or vegetables. All there are corner stores, gas stations, fast food places, which are obviously not healthy. And so we used our resources, we walked around, we talked to individuals, and we found out what do you cook, what do you eat, what are you missing, and we decided to design and build them a farm. And so in the end, we were able to provide resources, and we give all of these produce away for free. We make sure everyone in the community has access to everything. And the most important thing is when you begin to understand the disparity of ecology, and we begin to understand the disparity of climate change, you begin to understand what hurricanes really do to neighborhoods. And so what I learned, because in Chicago we don't have hurricanes, we do have blizzards, we do have polar vortexes, which drop things down to maybe -20 and -30, but we don't have to worry about 140-mile-per-hour winds on top of water unless we get the occasional tornado. And so in those moments, we learned that in these neighborhoods, post-hurricane, there may be 3 or 4 weeks without resources, without electricity, without water, without infrastructure. So just so many things that these neighborhoods don't have. And so many times we think of the hurricane itself as the disaster, when it's actually post-hurricane where a lot of the disparities begin to surface. And so currently we're working on a new project which is similar in style. It's a different client. This is in Delray Beach, Florida. This is a very nondescript church parish hall. This parish hall is used in the community by people where this used to be a sundown town. By a show of hands, who knows what a sundown town is? Oh, great, I get to teach you all something. All right, let me put on professor hat for a second, okay? All right, so sundown towns are areas where if you look like me or anywhere close to looking like me, the moment the sun sets, you are vulnerable to vigilantes doing whatever they want to do to you. That can be as harmful as murder, it can be as harmful as imprisonment, or whatever other unfortunate thing that you can imagine. All of these things happened during the 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and guess what? There are still sundown towns in the United States today in 2023. And if you can imagine what it means to be afraid to see the sunset, that's what it meant for a lot of black and brown people in the United States of America, and still feels that way. This town of Delray Beach, Florida, used to be a sundown town. And on this side of the street was where all of the Bahamians and the African Americans lived in the area. The largest landowner are church parishioners. They own this property here. And so currently we're in the progress of, we're in construction documents now, design development of turning this parish hall into this community center. So the front will be a storefront. We're going to cut a part of the building to create sort of an urban porch. We've planted about 40 fruit trees, everything from avocados to mangoes, just so we can have some things going in the community. And this is what the inside will look like. We're going to expose a lot of the existing structure. There's already a very beautiful terrazzo floor that's inside the place. So we're going to polish that up and show it and make this an area that people in the community can use on their own. Across the street is an empty parcel. As I mentioned before, there's a very large Bahamian community there, and they have a pop-up market that occurs every month. It's called the Black Mers Market. And so we figure instead of having the ubiquitous white tent that we all see at farmers market, what if we create a superstructure and these very, very small kiosks that reference the Bahamian history and the Bahamian neighborhood and the Bahamian flag, and then the actual wood that clads the kiosk references Bahamian straw weaving that you see in the neighborhood. And so it's a way of employing local practitioners and artisans, as well as amplifying the history and the legacy of those in the community, and doing these things in a way that does not displace people, empowers people, works with them, as opposed to working just simply and talking down to them. One thing many people don't begin to understand is when you do community work, it takes a long damn time, because there's the feedback back and forth. So that first project in Opa-locka took a total of 5.5 years. This project here in Del Rey, we're in year 2.5 to get to this point. Because again, if you really want to have meaningful conversations with individuals, that's what it takes. So, Zeno, you are welcome. I did it. All right, why are you all here? Monumental Affairs. So a lot of the work I do, as I mentioned, is around architecture and identity. On the left is a nondescript wall in Miami, Florida, along 12th Avenue. This nondescript wall is actually a segregation wall. This wall is what separated the black side of the area from the white side of the area. On the left, that is public housing. On the right, multifamily housing. If you've ever seen the movie Moonlight, that won the Academy Award, this is where it was filmed. And so this idea of monuments, monumentality, landscape, contested spaces has always been an interest of mine. The tough thing, though, is when you're a young person, a lot of times people don't listen to you. And so when you tell them there's so many sites that are contested that we should talk about, they say next time, wait your turn. And then George Floyd happened, 2020. All hell broke loose. Cities all over the world were on fire. And then people believed us. And then people said, okay, maybe you have a point. Maybe the things you've talked about for the past 30 years are actually legitimate. And so when this happened, the eyes were now on what do monuments mean? Who are they for? Who do they help? Who do they harm? And so now you are in a monument. You are here at the home of Paul Schultze-Naumburg, who was an anti-Semite, who was a racist, who would have never allowed many of the faces I see in here in this room when he owned this home. And so when I was approached by dieDAS to be the artistic director, the first thing I said to them is we have to talk about the history of the house. We cannot skip over this important history and this important legacy. Otherwise, you're wasting everyone's time. Why do we need to hide from things? In my opinion, as opposed to removing the canon, why can't we expand the canon? Why can't we give accurate representations of what was done, who did it, whether they be positive, negative, atrocities, or happiness? And this place was a place where a lot of very terrible things were thought up by a person who was not very kind. And if we look forward today, all of you are here who are the polar opposite. Those of you that are here in this space understand an architecture of care and understand what it means to do things for people and to be inclusive. And so Monumental Affairs, this is the brief. There were some amazing people that composed the advisory board, and those individuals helped us to craft this. There were a lot of talks that we had on Zoom back and forth about ambitions, reining some of those in, expanding others, so that we can be as open as possible for the potential of fellows to apply. And so none of this would be possible without this gentleman here, Zeno Franchini.
Does this work?
It does.
Yes. Great. Amazing. Thank you, Germane. I hope you enjoy his presentation. I think you can thank me for his presentation as well. I'm joking. I've been trying to assist Germane at the best of my capacity. I've been a fellow here 2 years ago, and I tried to bring this experience with me and hopefully to also facilitate the 4 fellows of this year to have a better experience and working environment. Just a few words about how I ended up here. So I met Germane in Palermo during his research, and I tried to help him in finding places and sources for that research. And my work I'm co-founder of Marginal Studio, which is based in Palermo, and that was a deliberate decision to apply what I learned in design education in an arrival city. So through my work, I try to question the European, Italian, Western approach to migration and the constant victimization that we impose on people. As Europe, we seem to say to everyone who wants to come here, you're a victim. That's the only way we can accept you. And in my work, in my experience, the people I work with is absolutely the opposite. So people bring a lot of knowledge, bring a lot of craft knowledge, especially, which is what I experience every day. And I try to apply that knowledge and to experiment in design processes. So learning about natural materials, learning about sustainable techniques, and trying to implement that in a process that makes values of people knowledge. That's mostly what I do. I'm not gonna take more time so we can move to the Monumental Affairs and Q&A.
Thank you. So if the Monumental Affairs theme was my brainchild, Zeno is the only reason that it was executed to its fullest extent. These are two of the amazing fellows. Many of you have met them already. Antoinette and Adam, as you talked about before, have work that deals with ecology, landscapes, adaptive reuse. And there's Sylvia and Yassine, who look at contested spaces, fascist architecture, as well as decolonialism. And so we tried to make the group diverse as possible and as far as their interest, right? It just so happens they're also physically diverse as well. We tried to make this thing as open as possible so we can have interdisciplinarity and cross-collaboration. And the monumental themes were these 5, right? So we opened the week talking about the entire canon, who determines what's a monument, who determines how long it's there, who purchases it, what do we monumentalize, all the way through these other moments as well. And over the course of the week, we had amazing guests that came to visit that matched each of those disciplines. On the left, you have the lovely Mo Aswang, who showed a film about what it means to be Aryan in Germany. And so we watched this film, and then we learned actually to be Aryan is to be Persian. It actually has nothing to do with being white. And then on the right, we have the lovely Studio Labor, who I see Farah in the back right there, who took the fellows on a tour of the home to understand what it means to be sensorial in a space beyond using your eyes, but using your ears. We went to some monuments. That Genghis Khan looking guy right there is the man who united Germany. It's a massive, massive statue with a lot of stairs. Antoinette will not like me sharing this, but she's afraid of heights, but she made it all the way to the top. On the right-hand side is one of the days that we went foraging with a very beautiful dress. That's Christina Rausch. And again, if we're talking about landscapes and we're in a space with beautiful landscapes, why not actually have someone come in? And then they actually, I won't say we, because I didn't cook. They cooked. They cooked all the things that they actually found that evening. And so it was an amazing opportunity to watch everyone grow from the first day to the last day, where everything really was packed. From the moment they arrived to meet with fellows. I see Ito right here in the front, representative of Arts of the Working Class, who did an amazing talk on the canon and understanding what it means to do this work and to do this labor in a way that not only gives to others, but replenishes others, because this is very, very, very difficult work. And then we went to Buchenwald. This is probably the toughest day that we had as a cohort. To actually go to a concentration camp, to see the horrors of this location, but to also understand that we must acknowledge these pasts and begin moments of repair and to make everything a bit more palatable to those that were either descendants of those that were hurt or those that are currently still being pushed down to this day. And so this is us walking down the massive monument. And I think I speak for all of us when I say at the end of the day, we walked back and we found moments of happiness where we became a band and we started singing, walking down the streets from Bad Kuzen. And if you've ever seen some of those old 80s films where like everybody's happy and at the beginning of the movie, everybody's sad, like The Breakfast Club, we were The Breakfast Club as we walked down the street coming back. And as I told you yesterday, everything revolved around food. As you can see, everything revolved around food. We had amazing dishes that were made by the lovely Andrea, who is Tatiana's older sister. She's absolutely incredible. And I think these moments really allow all the fellows to be themselves. It was a moment to decompress. It was a moment to reflect on the day. It was a moment that we could share something that was very important to us with other people. And we had very, very interesting discursive conversations, ones that were completely vulnerable because everyone allowed themselves to be vulnerable in this contested space. So this is not possible with any of these beautiful people. I thank them. I thank the amazing mentors. I thank the advisory board. I thank Arna. I thank Tatiana and Mr. Mazzona for this opportunity. I thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Germane, for the insight into your work and also the explanations about Monumental Affairs. And I think it really makes clear what dieDAS also is about. And yeah, I hope there are some questions from the audience.
Or not.
Or not, because then I can probably start with a question.
Okay.
And because I was wondering, what is next? Like, do you have any plans to proceed as a group? Is the Breakfast Club going to meet again? Or is this, what's next?
So one of the lovely things about dieDAS is the network and the entanglements that occur as a result. And so the lovely Sarah Whiting is on the advisory board, and she's the dean of the Harvard Graduate School of Design. And so for 8 weeks at the end of this semester, I will be conducting a Monumental Affairs option studio, which will also talk about similar themes, so that we begin to understand across the entire continent, what do these contested spaces mean? Because we know they exist in the United States. We know they exist in other locations as well. So I'm very fortunate to be able to have that connection between the two so that Monumental Affairs does not only stop here, but that it has a much longer legacy that extends. As far as the fellows, we are all a family now. They can't get rid of me. So the Breakfast Club will always be a gang that will be together. And I think that's the awesome thing about it being 2 weeks intense and very tight-knit in that we all become family.
Yeah. Because as you said, of course, like one question. Because, of course, monumental affairs, it's a huge topic. And as you just said, like after, especially after the George Floyd incident, there has been like worldwide the questioning of monuments and their roles and who are they actually for, and what do we want to remember through them, and how do they have probably worked on to have like a certain relevance for us, for our societies today. And yeah, thank you again. And there was one question.
And first of all, thank you. Secondly, it's 7 weeks, not 8 weeks, so you can cut something from that syllabus. No, my question is so I teach history when I get a chance to teach, and I really appreciate your saying, okay, the canon doesn't mean you get rid of things and replace them and sort of pretend that things never happened, but you add on. But there's the inevitable challenge of how do you bracket? How do you fit things in enough time? And in 2 weeks, this is what's sort of extraordinary about this really short fellowship. You all reached a certain point. Part of that is helped by the meals and things. But thinking back to everyone here who teaches, how do you expand the canon and make it feasible in the amount of time that students have in a typical class?
That is a great question. That's why you're a dean of a fantastic school. But in all seriousness, I think the important thing is providing the possibilities. And so when it comes to an expansion, I think part of this is on the responsibility of the faculty to be willing to explore these topics. And the other half is on the students or the fellows who are willing to also give their own research. So if I were to provide a list of 20 books or 30 books that talk to these things, and we only can get through 4 or 5 over the course of the 2 weeks, over the course of the 2 weeks, then there has to be a moment where some of the students or fellows take the responsibility themselves to begin to expand their own collective knowledge. Otherwise, it's a bit disingenuous, in my opinion, to demand things, but then to not also put your own effort and sweat equity into that process. And so for us, we provided a massive reading list, things on monuments, things from the funambulist, amazing writers like Mabel O. Wilson, Saidiya Hartman, and said, hey, here are all of these opportunities to talk about decolonialization, to talk about expansion of the canon, to talk about the titans of architecture you've all learned about, as well as the titans you have never heard of. And then from there, the responsibility then transfers from me as artistic director to that other individual to then take that knowledge and begin to expand their own understanding. And if they choose not to, and I feel that's not a failure of the system, that's a failure of opportunity or failure of the person to actually push forward.
Is there another question? Back. I'm coming.
So yesterday there was a lot of talk about materiality, and my question relates to this issue of monumentality on one hand and materiality. So already very early, Robert Musil, the Austrian writer, made this hypothesis that today, meaning early modernism, all these monuments made of bronze, marble, and so on are somehow integrated against attention. So people don't care anymore about those kings and so on. And the monument, and that was also a kind of a concept, monument is much more something that reminds you an event. So for Gideon, a firework was the real monument of the modern time. So my question is how you negotiate, on one hand, between the material monument and monumentality, and on the other hand, particularly in our digital age, the media event as monumental.
Absolutely. So over the course of the 2.5 weeks, we absolutely spoke to informal monuments. And I think as far as my own interests in monumentality and where I'm from in the United States, I care much more about the informal monument than the formal monument. I care more about the teddy bear that finds itself on a tree when someone is unfortunately murdered, like George Floyd in the middle of the street. It's not bronze, it's not concrete, it's not permanent, but it is absolutely something that happened. It is something that everyone in that collective community understands and reveres. But you can't talk about those without also talking about the Robert E. Lee statues that are also sort of the testament to these unfortunate atrocities. And so here, I've been fortunate enough to be surrounded by 4 brilliant fellows who have taught me as much as I hope I've helped them. And one of those is Yassine, who would continually talk about things should not be permanent. Things should not exist forever. Things should deteriorate. But then when you put a statue in bronze, it's pretty damn hard for it to disintegrate, right? You begin to make these things permanent as a consistent reminder of the atrocities that certain people have done to others. And so if we only can talk about the big monuments as opposed to the chair that sits on a porch or the tree in the neighborhood that everyone played around, then I feel we're doing a poor job of really talking about the center of monumentality, which is collective memory and sites of memory. And I think we've done an adequate job of that. I hope we've done an adequate job of that to really speak to the difference between them, but the fact that there really is a similar sort of meaning depending on who is the person that's looking at the statue. Yeah.
So time allows for one more question.
Make it a good one. You know you want to, I see it in your face. You know you want to ask something.
I got something to ask.
Okay.
Okay, fine, I'll ask it.
Okay, yep.
So there's obviously in Germany, but also in other places in Europe, Italy namely, but I think it's also creeping into the United Kingdom. Of course, in the United States, there's a lot of talk of memory culture, Erinnerungskultur in German. And at dinner yesterday, we were amusing the thought that maybe memory culture is also a reckoning of material privilege, since you could always change public space, or you could always have the material conditions to, well, morph it as you wish. So I guess my question is, what could memory culture be without these material benefits?
Yeah, so Ido's really smart too, and Ido loves asking me very difficult questions all the time. It's part of his charm. I think the important thing when it comes to memory, and this is what I mentioned before, I'm more interested in the ritual of space and the tectonics of space, and that directly aligns with this idea of materiality versus collective memory. I think when you're someone who is marginalized, when you're of a group that's marginalized, it's hard to get the resources to then cement the things that you find important. Back home in Chicago, there's very important spaces like the headquarters of the Black Panthers or the recent Emmett Till home that it's very hard to get these things on the register of historic importance. And I think the memory becomes a way to circumvent that. It becomes a way to say, well, if you don't think this space is important to me or to my people or to my neighborhood or my residents or those who are affected, then we all will band together to then create importance. And that significance would then be something that you can keep in perpetuity because you can't erase those things, right? You can knock down a pillar, you can repave a street, you can completely graze a landscape, but you can't get rid of that memory that the people that are there hold. So I personally find that as long as we continue to play up those opportunities, more that we continue to provide those opportunities for people to have a platform to discuss those memories, then it also keeps them in the foreground, just like we would see in the middle of a plaza, l'Arc de Triomphe or something like that, right? And so that's how I see it, and I think a conference like this where we have these discussions, we have these amazing keynotes who are gonna come up after me and talk far more eloquently and way more interestingly about their own work, then that continues to push these things forward.
Thank you,
everyone.
Thank you very much.